The chipped plexiglass of the Minnetonka Youth Hockey Association rink vibrated with the slapshots. Leo Maxwell blew his whistle, the shrill sound swallowed by the cavernous space and the wind howling outside. 8 kids bundled in layers skated ragged circles around him, their movements more clumsy wishful thinking than coordinated practice. It was the 3rd week of January, and the cold had a teeth-chattering grip on Minnesota. Attendance was pathetic. "Come on, Falcons, heads up. Move those feet," he yelled, his voice roughened by years of shouting over the ice. The Falcons consisted of mostly kids who weren't naturally gifted or whose parents couldn't afford the more prestigious travel leagues. Leo didn't mind. They needed a coach, and frankly, he needed them. 10-year-old Billy Hansen, all elbows and anxiety, tripped over his own skates and landed with a thud. Leo skated over, already sighing inwardly. Billy was a good kid, but completely lacked confidence. "You all right, Billy?" Billy nodded, his face red, eyes brimming. "Just cold, coach." "Cold doesn't fall you down. Focus, okay? Pretend you're a falcon, swoop in, grab the puck, and fly." Leo offered a gloved hand, helping Billy to his feet. It was a terrible analogy, even he knew, but Billy managed a watery smile. He ran drills, focusing on passing and basic skating, desperately trying to instill some semblance of teamwork. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on the ice. The smell of old Zamboni fumes and damp wool hung heavy in the air. He pushed them hard, harder than they were used to. It wasn't about making them future NHL stars. It was about making himself feel like something again. A phantom ache bloomed in his left shoulder, a souvenir from his playing days. He ignored it. Pain was familiar company. Latter, nursing a lukewarm coffee at O'Malley's, the only bar in Excelsior. Leo watched the snowfall. It plastered the windows, turning the outside world into a blurred white canvas. The bar was dimly lit, smelling of stale beer and fried food. A country song twanged softly from the jukebox. A handful of locals occupied the worn out booths and the scarred wooden bar. Familiar faces. Safe old man Hemlock, a retired carpenter, was holding court with a couple of the younger guys, regaling them with fishing stories. Martha Olson, the town librarian, sat quietly in a corner, reading a paperback. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name. And more importantly, your history. Leo had deliberately sought out this anonymity. Excelsior was a far cry from the bright lights and intense scrutiny of his previous life, a conscious retreat. He traded Division I college hockey for a town that barely registered on the state map. And he hadn't regretted it, not until today, not fully. He took a sip of his coffee. It tasted like ash. A flicker of memory, unwelcome and sharp, pierced his present. The roar of a crowd, the glare of cameras, the weight of expectation. The pressure. He saw Robbie, his star player, face flushed and triumphant after scoring the winning goal in the regional semifinals. He saw the congratulations, the backslapping, the smiling faces, and then the news, the accusations, the fallout. His hand trembled, spilling coffee onto the worn Formica tabletop. He quickly wiped it up with a napkin. It wasn't the first time the memories had intruded. They came unbidden, triggered by the most innocuous things. Thundy, the smell of ice, the sound of skates, a kid's excited shout. He'd been good, really good. A rising star in the college coaching world, head coach at state by 30. Then, everything had crumbled. A carelessly worded text, a misinterpreted meeting, a jealous rival with a vendetta. The details didn't matter anymore. Only the outcome, dismissed, vilified. Left to pick up the pieces of his shattered reputation, he took a deep breath, forcing the darkness back down. He'd served his time, paid the price now. He just wanted to be left alone. Rough day, Leo. He looked up. Sheriff Buckley stood beside his booth, a steaming mug in his hand. Frank Buckley. They'd gone to high school together. Frank had been the golden boy, captain of the football team. Destined for greater things, he'd chosen to stay in Excelsior to protect and serve his community. Leo had chased a different dream, one that had ultimately betrayed him. "Just thinking," Leo said, forcing a smile. "About the Falcons," Frank chuckled. "Heard they're having a tough time getting enough kids out with this weather." "It is a struggle, but they're good kids," Frank nodded, taking a seat uninvited. "That is good. This town needs more folks investing in the kids." He paused, his expression suddenly serious. "We got a situation out on the lake." Leo's stomach tightened. Lake Minnetonka was the lifeblood of Excelsior. Boating, fishing, swimming in the summer, ice fishing, snowmobiling, and skating in the winter. It was a source of recreation, of livelihood, of community. And now, a situation. What kind of situation, body? Ice fishermen found a body frozen in the ice this morning out near Maxwell Bay. Leo felt a coldness seep into his bones, a chilling echo of the lake itself, Maxwell Bay named after his family. His great-grandfather had been one of the first settlers in the area. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Any idea who it is?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Not yet. They're working on it. Poor bastard's been out there a while, judging by the condition." Frank grimaced. "The medical examiner is on his way, but it is strange, no obvious signs of foul play. But something just doesn't sit right." He met Frank's gaze, a thoughtful, assessing look. He knew what Frank was thinking. Leo, the outsider, the man with a past. He'd always been an observer, quick to analyze, to read people. "I was wondering, you've lived here a long time, Leo. Know the lake like the back of your hand. You got any thoughts? Anyone you've seen out there lately? Folks who might have been taking a chance with this weather?" Frank asked, carefully casual. Leo hesitated. He hadn't been near the lake in weeks. He deliberately avoided it, as he avoided anything that reminded him of his past. But he knew the lake, he knew its currents, its hidden dangers, its secluded coves, and he knew the people who frequented it. He thought of Old Man Hemlock, always willing to share his fishing spots, of the Johnson brothers notorious for their reckless snowmobiling, of Sarah Miller, a young woman who often went ice skating alone, lost in her own world. But something felt off. Frank wasn't just asking about recent activity. He was probing, testing the waters, trying to gauge his reaction. "Not that I know of, Frank," Leo said carefully, meeting his old acquaintance's gaze without flinching. "It has been too cold for most people to risk it. Though I'm sure there are always a few hardy souls. Maybe ask around at the bait shop." Frank studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Maybe I will. Just thought I'd ask someone with, fide local insight." The phrase hung in the air, dripping with unspoken implications. Local insight, as if Leo's past didn't precede him, as if he wasn't still viewed with suspicion despite his attempts at reinvention. Frank finished his coffee, stood up, and clapped Leo on the shoulder. "Keep an eye out, Leo, and if you hear anything at all, you let me know." He walked away, disappearing into the swirling snow outside. Leo stared into his own cooling coffee, a knot tightening in his chest. The false sense of security he'd so carefully constructed had just cracked. He wasn't invisible, he was being watched, and a body had been found in Maxwell Bay. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text message from an unknown number. He opened it, his heart sinking. "We know what you did." The chipped formica of O'Malley's still held the ghost of his lukewarm coffee, a faint ring staining the surface. Leo hadn't slept. Frank Buckley's request, framed as a friendly inquiry, had felt like a tightening noose. He'd spent the night replaying the conversation, dissecting Frank's words, searching for hidden meanings. The diner was crowded for a Thursday morning, the air thick with the smell of bacon and brewing coffee. Excelsior residents huddled in booths, seeking warmth and a momentary escape from the relentless cold. Every glance felt weighted, every conversation hushed. He felt their eyes on him, assessing, questioning. Sheriff Buckley was already there when Leo arrived, sitting in the same booth, nursing a black coffee. He looked tired, his face etched with a grimness that went beyond the usual weariness of small-town law enforcement. "Morning, Leo," Frank greeted him, gesturing to the empty seat. "Thought you'd be here. Got an ID on the victim." Leo sat down, his appetite vanished. "Who was it?" "Arthur Penhaligon, moved into town about 6 months ago. Real estate developer. Had plans to build a luxury resort on the far side of the lake." A resort Leo remembered hearing whispers about it. A controversial project that would dramatically alter the landscape of Lake Minnetonka. There had been opposition from some of the longtime residents, who feared it would ruin the area's quiet charm. "Did he have any enemies?" Leo asked. Knowing the question was inevitable, Frank shrugged. "In this line of work, everyone's got enemies. He ruffled some feathers, let's put it that way." Locals weren't thrilled with his plans, apparently. He was pushing hard, trying to get the zoning approvals he needed. Stepped on a few toes, and the initial assessment, hypothermia. But the me found some bruising, not consistent with simply falling through the ice. More like a struggle. We're waiting on the full report, but I'm not ruling anything out. Frank pushed a couple of photographs across the table. Grim, stark images of the body frozen in a grotesque tableau. Leo forced himself to look, cataloging the details. The contorted limbs, the glazed eyes, the bluish tinge of the skin. His stomach lurched. They found him about a quarter-mile from shore, near the old Abbott place. It is a popular spot for ice fishing in the winter. Frank tapped the photo with a thick finger. I was hoping you might be able to shed some light on who might have been out there lately. Anyone who might have had a run-in with Penhaligon. Leo rattled off names, trying to sound helpful, detached. Old Man Hemlock, the Johnson brothers, the usual suspects. He mentioned Sarah Miller, the young woman who ice-skated alone. He omitted the name of Marcus Bellwether, a local businessman and outspoken opponent of Penhaligon's resort project, remembering a terse conversation he'd overheard at the hardware store a few weeks back. Frank hadn't asked specifically about Bellwether, and Leo didn't offer, not yet. Anything else? Frank pressed, his gaze unwavering. Not that I can think of. It is a tight-knit community, Frank. People mostly keep to themselves, especially in the winter. A half-truth Excelsior was a tight-knit community, but beneath the surface of politeness and neighborliness lay a tangle of secrets and resentments. Frank didn't seem convinced. Right. He paused, then added. Penhaligon was asking around about you, actually. Said he'd seen you at the rink. Wanted to know where you came from, what you were doing here. Leo felt a chill run down his spine. Penhaligon had been investigating him. Why? Just making conversation. I suppose, Leo said, attempting nonchalance. Frank raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. Maybe. Keep me posted if you remember anything at all. The diner felt smaller, airless. Every conversation around him seemed to pause momentarily as he and Frank spoke, then resumed, quieter, more guarded. He felt the shift immediately. Eyes that had once offered casual greetings now avoided his gaze. Whispers followed him as he walked to the counter to pay. He was an outsider, and now a person of interest. He walked back to the rink, the weight of suspicion pressing down on him. Practice was already underway, the sound of skates and shouts a welcome distraction. But even there, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. After practice, while sweeping the ice, he noticed something odd near the access point to the lake, where Penhaligon had apparently been fishing. Partially buried in the snow, discarded like trash, was a hockey glove. Not just any glove, it was a high-end model. Made of supple leather, with intricate stitching and a custom fit. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. It was a pro-stock glove, the kind used by professional players, and it was expensive, funny, very expensive. He knew every piece of hockey equipment sold in a 50-mile radius. He'd spent his life immersed in the sport. This glove hadn't come from around here. No one in Excelsior could afford this kind of gear. The leather was still slightly damp, smelling faintly of something metallic. He sniffed it cautiously. It was faint, almost imperceptible. But it was there, blood. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't a random accident. This wasn't just a zoning dispute gone wrong. This was something else entirely, and somehow he was connected to it. He carefully stowed the glove in his gym bag, promising himself to take it to Frank, though. A chilling thought struck him. Maybe some evidence was better left unfound. Walking to his car after the rink, he found a crowd gathered around it. He quickened his pace, a sense of dread washing over him. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. His windshield was shattered, not by a rock or a stray branch, but by something deliberately thrown with force. And lying smack dab in the center of the shattered glass, glistening in the pale afternoon light, was a hockey puck. But it wasn't just any puck, it was one of the older, worn-out pucks from the rink. And it was covered in blood. A freezing, metallic scent filled the air. A message, a threat. His past hadn't stayed buried. It was rising to the surface, icy and unforgiving, threatening to drag him down with it. And someone wanted him to know they were watching. Someone knew more than they were letting on. Someone knew Sooty exactly who he was. A figure emerged from the shadows of a nearby building, quickly disappearing around the corner before Leo could get a clear look. A dark hoodie and jeans were all he could make out. His hand trembled as he reached for his phone. He dialed Frank Buckley's number, his voice barely a whisper. "Frank, we have a problem." The metallic tang of blood lingered in the air, even after the police had dusted his car for prints. Frank Buckley, predictably, was all business. He'd taken the puck as evidence, offering a grim nod and a thinly veiled warning to stay out of the investigation. He knew Frank was walking a tightrope, balancing his loyalty to the community with his obligation to the law. And Leo was undeniably a complication. He hadn't slept again. The image of the bloodied puck haunted him, a crimson stain on the pristine white landscape of his carefully constructed new life. He needed to understand what was happening, to regain some semblance of control. He needed to understand the glove. The pro-stock craftsmanship was undeniable. Searching online, he located the manufacturer, and after a series of inquiries, traced the glove's origin to the Blackwood Academy, an exclusive invitation, only hockey school that had shuttered its doors unexpectedly 6 months ago. Blackwood Academy catered to the elite, the sons of the wealthy, promising a fast track to the NHL. It was located just outside of Minneapolis, a good 70 miles from Excelsior. What was a Blackwood Academy glove doing near Lake Minnetonka? And what did it have to do with Arthur Penhaligon? He drove to Minneapolis, the snow falling in heavy, swirling flakes. The academy stood abandoned. A hulking, modern structure surrounded by a chain-link fence. A no trespassing sign swayed in the wind, it felt. Wrong, like a ghost ship holding onto secrets. He found a security guard patrolling the perimeter, a burly man named Hank, with tired eyes and an even tireder disposition. "Academy's closed up tight," Hank said, after Leo explained his inquiry. "Money problems, I heard. Owner disappeared, owing everyone a fortune. Place has been sitting empty ever since. Do you remember who used to train here? Any particularly flashy players?" Leo asked. Careful not to reveal too much, Hank scratched his beard. They were all flashy, rich kids with big dreams. There was a Rossi, a Dimitri, couple of others I can't put a name to. They all had the best gear, always showing off. He asked about distinctive equipment, specifically high-end gloves. Hank vaguely recalled a kid who favored a custom-made leather glove, a deep burgundy color. He couldn't remember the player's name, but said he'd been one of the Academy's star recruits. Heard he had a temper, too, real hothead. The information felt fragmented, incomplete, but it was a start. He thanked Hank and drove back to Excelsior, the mystery deepening with every mile. He spent the afternoon digging into Penhaligon's background. The land developer had arrived in Excelsior with a reputation for being ruthless, aggressive, and uncompromising. He'd made a fortune building luxury golf courses and gated communities in other parts of the state. Now he'd set his sights on Lake Minnetonka. He discovered Penhaligon had been aggressively buying up land around the lake, offering exorbitant sums to entice owners to sell. He'd also clashed with several longtime residents who were unwilling to part with their properties. Among them was Gus Broderick, owner of Broderick Lumber, a local institution. Leo found Broderick at his sawmill, supervising the unloading of timber. The air smelled of sawdust and diesel. Broderick was a large, imposing man with calloused hands and a gruff demeanor. He wasn't happy to see Leo. "What do you want, Maxwell?" he growled. Wiping sweat from his brow, "Just had a few questions about Arthur Penhaligon," Leo said. Trying to sound casual, Broderick's jaw tightened. Penhaligon was a parasite, coming in here, trying to buy up everything, ruining this town. I heard you had some disagreements with him. Disagreements he tried to lowball me on my waterfront property. Offered me peanuts for something that has been in my family for 3 generations. I told him to get lost. Did you threaten him? Leo pressed carefully. Broderick laughed. A harsh, grating sound. Threaten him. I told him what he could do with his fancy resort. I have a right to protect my property. He eyed Leo suspiciously. Why are you asking me these questions, Maxwell? You working with the sheriff? Just trying to understand what happened, Leo said, refusing to meet his gaze. Well, understand this. I didn't kill him, and I don't appreciate you snooping around. He turned back to his work, dismissing Leo with a wave of his hand. The encounter left Leo uneasy. Broderick clearly had a motive and a volatile temper, but something about his anger felt performative, a distraction. Later, at a late-night diner, nursing a black coffee, he received a call from his sponsor. Earl had been a lifeline, a steady presence during his struggles with alcohol. Hearing his voice was a jolt to his system. "You're slipping, Leo," Earl said, his voice firm but kind. "I heard you've been at O'Malley's every night this week, and I see the tremor in your voice. You're stressed." Leo tried to brush it off. "Just a little busy, Earl. Been helping out with the hockey team." "Don't give me that. You're using this situation as an excuse. You're letting it consume you." "I'm not, Leo. Listen to me. One drink. That is all it takes. The wheels start turning again. You know that." Earl was right. He knew it. The urge had been building, a subtle hum beneath the surface of his anxiety. The constant pressure, the suspicion, the fear, they were all pushing him to the edge. "I know, Earl. I'll be careful." "Careful isn't good enough, Leo. You need to stay away from the bottle and stay out of this mess. It is not your fight, but it was soon his fight." He couldn't walk away. He couldn't let this linger gnawing at his conscience. As he hung up the phone, his cell rang again. An unknown number. He hesitated before answering it, a knot tightening in his stomach. A distorted voice, electronically altered, spoke on the other end. "Stay out of it, coach. Some things are better left frozen." The line went dead. Leo stared at his phone, his heart hammering in his chest. He wasn't just being watched, he was being threatened, and the icy grip of fear tightened around him, promising a long, dark winter. The distorted voice on the phone echoed in Leo's mind. "Some things are better left frozen." Asterisk, it wasn't a threat. It was a promise, a chilling echo of the past he tried so desperately to bury. He spent the morning obsessively researching Arthur Penhaligon, poring over old newspaper articles, land records, and online databases. He found nothing that directly linked Penhaligon to his past, but the feeling of being watched intensified. Every shadow seemed to conceal a hidden observer. Every car that passed his house felt like surveillance. Then, a detail emerged from a forgotten corner of the internet. A small article from a regional sports blog dating back 5 years, mentioning Penhaligon's nascent hockey academy and its aggressive recruitment strategy. The academy had been scouting players across the Midwest, identifying promising talent for its exclusive program. And then he saw the name Ethan Bellwether. The name ripped through him like a shard of ice. Ethan Bellwether, the star forward. The kid who died, the memory flooded back, raw and agonizing. The blinding snowstorm, the slick ice, the sickening crunch, the regional semi-finals. His team poised for victory. And then, chaos Ethan, skating at full speed, colliding with the boards, a broken neck, instant death. He'd been head coach at State, responsible though legally cleared. The weight of responsibility had crushed him, the whispers. The accusations, the relentless scrutiny, they followed him everywhere. His career, his reputation, his life, all shattered in a single, horrific moment. Now, Penhaligon. The connection felt insidious, a carefully laid trap. He remembered a brief conversation with Penhaligon after Ethan's death, a seemingly innocuous offer to help with grief counseling. He dismissed it at the time, but now it felt predatory. He dug deeper, searching for any connection between Penhaligon and Ethan Bellwether beyond a fleeting scouting report. He discovered Penhaligon had been aggressively pursuing Ethan, offering him a full scholarship to the academy, dangling the promise of a fast track to the NHL. Ethan's parents had been hesitant, wary of the academy's exclusivity and Penhaligon's reputation. Then, a digital rabbit hole led him to a hidden forum, a dark corner of the internet frequented by hockey enthusiasts, a thread dedicated to Ethan Bellwether's death. Among the speculation and conspiracy theories, one post caught his eye, a user claiming to be a former teammate of Ethan, alleging the accident wasn't an accident at all. The user, going by the handle IceCruise78 Reels, claimed someone had deliberately tampered with Ethan's skates, loosening the screws just before the game. A subtle act of sabotage that would have made the ice treacherous, a fatal slip waiting to happen. Leo felt a cold wave of nausea wash over him. Sabotage. Someone had intentionally caused Ethan's death. He tried to trace the IP address of IceCruise78 Reels, but the user had taken precautions, masking their identity. He had a lead, but it was a tenuous one. He decided to reach out to Mark Hansen, Ethan's teammate and a close friend of the Bellwether family. Mark now owned a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of town. Mark was reluctant to talk, his eyes clouded with grief and suspicion. "Why are you asking about this now, Leo, after all these years?" I have a feeling something is right," Leo said, struggling to find the right words. "About Ethan's death. About what happened," Mark sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "It was a tragedy, Leo. A senseless accident. That is all it was." "I am not so sure anymore," Leo said, cautiously. He told Mark about Penhaligon's interest in Ethan. About the forum post alleging sabotage. Mark's face paled. "Sabotage? I heard rumors, whispers, but I didn't want to believe them." He paused, looking around nervously. "Look, Leo, I don't know what you are getting into, but be careful. This town, it has a long memory, and some things are best left buried." He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "What do you mean?" Mark leaned closer, lowering his voice. "The ice remembers everything, Leo, everything." He didn't elaborate, offering only a haunted look and a warning to stay away. He left the shop, feeling more lost and isolated than ever. The pieces were starting to fit, forming a disturbing picture. Penhaligon wasn't just a land developer. He was a man with secrets, a man who had been digging into Leo's past, a man who, perhaps, harbored a dark connection to Ethan Bellwether's death. He drove directly to the sheriff's office. Intending to share his findings, he found Frank Buckley waiting for him, a grim expression on his face. "Come with me, Leo," Frank said, leading him into a small interrogation room. The room was stark and sterile, with a steel table and 2 chairs. Frank sat across from him, his face impassive. "We've been reviewing the evidence, Leo," Frank began, his voice cold and measured, "and we've uncovered some interesting information." "What information?" Leo asked, his heart pounding. "We've learned that Arthur Penhaligon had recently reopened the investigation into Ethan Bellwether's death," Frank said, his gaze unwavering. "He hired a private investigator to re-examine the evidence, to interview witnesses. He was convinced something wasn't right." Leo felt his blood run cold. "And he prompted," his voice barely a whisper. And Frank said, leaning forward, "You were a person of interest in his investigation, Leo. In fact, you were his primary focus. He was looking into your coaching record, your relationships with the players, the circumstances surrounding the accident." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "He was digging into your past, Leo. And now, you are a suspect." A suspect? The word hung in the air. A death sentence to the fragile life he'd rebuilt. Frank Buckley hadn't arrested him, hadn't even formally accused him. But the implication was clear. He was under surveillance, presumed guilty. Leo refused to cooperate. He wouldn't let himself be a pawn in Frank's game. He needed to find the truth to clear his name, and he needed to do it on his own terms. He remembered Mark Hansen's cryptic warning. The ice remembers everything. Ordini remembered the location of a secluded ice shack, a place Ethan and his friends frequented, tucked away in a remote cove on the far side of the lake. It was a long shot, but he had a feeling he'd find answers there. The drive was treacherous, the snow falling in thick, blinding gusts. The lake stretched out before him, a vast, white expanse reflecting the gloomy sky. The ice groaned and cracked under the weight of the snow, a constant reminder of its fragility. He found the shack easily enough, a dilapidated wooden structure barely clinging to the frozen surface. It looked abandoned, but a faint wisp of smoke curling from the chimney suggested otherwise. He approached cautiously, his senses on high alert. He could hear voices inside, muffled but distinct. He pressed his ear against the warped wooden planks. Should have just let it go. Penhaligon was a problem, a serious problem. But this was too much. The voice was unmistakable, Gus Broderick. He burst through the door, his hand instinctively reaching for the small, concealed knife he'd started carrying. Broderick jumped, startled, knocking over a steaming mug of coffee, standing with him. A figure Leo didn't recognize, a man in an expensive tailored coat, his face partially hidden by a fur hat. "Maxwell, what the hell are you doing here?" Broderick barked, his face flushed with anger. "I think I overheard enough," Leo said, his voice cold and steady. "You hired someone to scare Penhaligon, didn't you? To intimidate him into dropping the resort project." Broderick scoffed, Scare him, maybe. He was ruining this town, disrupting our way of life. I wanted him to back off, that is all. And what about Ethan Bellwether? Leo pressed, his gaze fixed on Broderick. Did you have anything to do with his death? Broderick's face darkened. That was an accident, Maxwell, a tragic accident. I had nothing to do with it. The man in the coat stepped forward, his eyes narrowed. This is getting out of hand. You should leave now, Mr. Maxwell, before you regret it. Leo ignored him. Who are you? The man hesitated, then removed his hat, revealing a face that was both familiar and shocking. Julian Blackwood, the former owner of the Blackwood Academy, you. Leo breathed, his mind reeling. What are you doing here? I was just offering Mr. Broderick some advice, Blackwood said smoothly, his voice dripping with condescension. He is a respected member of this community. He doesn't deserve to be harassed by washed-up hockey coaches. You're protecting him, aren't you? Leo accused. You were the one who ordered it. You orchestrated the whole thing. Blackwood's facade crumbled, revealing a cold, ruthless ambition. Penhaligon was digging into my past. He discovered some irregularities with the Academy's funding. He was threatening to expose me. I couldn't let that happen. So you had him silenced? It wasn't supposed to go this far. Broderick interjected, his voice trembling. I just wanted him roughed up, a message sent. I didn't want him killed. You hired someone to tamper with Ethan's skates, didn't you? Leo demanded, his voice rising. It was a deliberate act of sabotage. Blackwood's eyes glinted with cold fury. Ethan was a threat. He was too good. He was going to be a problem. He was gaining attention that should have been directed towards my academy. The truth hung in the air, a suffocating weight. Penhaligon wasn't just investigating Leo's past. He'd stumbled upon a decades-old conspiracy, a web of deceit and betrayal. And now, they were both targets. You're both going to jail, Leo said, his hand tightening around the knife. Blackwood lunged, attempting to disarm him. Leo dodged, driving his fist into Blackwood's jaw. Broderick joined the fray, swinging wildly. They grappled, stumbling towards the weak point in the ice. Near the entrance to the shack, the ice groaned ominously under their combined weight. Leo managed to knock Broderick to the ground, but Blackwood was relentless, his strength surprising. They wrestled for control, slipping and sliding on the treacherous surface. Suddenly, the ice beneath Blackwood's feet cracked. He screamed, flailing his arms as he plunged into the frigid water. Leo instinctively reached out, trying to grab him. But the ice gave way beneath his own feet. He felt a sickening lurch as he tumbled forward, the icy water engulfing him. He fought to stay afloat, the freezing waters stealing his breath. He kicked and struggled, managing to grab onto a piece of splintered wood from the collapsing shack. He looked up, gasping for air, to see Blackwood struggling in the water, his face contorted with panic. But then, a spotlight illuminated the scene, cutting through the swirling snow. A figure emerged from the darkness. Sheriff Frank Buckley, standing on the solid ice, a look of grim determination on his face. Freeze, Frank shouted, leveling his weapon. Drop the wood, Maxwell. Leo stared at the sheriff, disbelief washing over him. He'd come to help, or so it seemed. Frank, he is the killer. Leo yelled, his voice hoarse. Blackwood, he killed Ethan Bellwether. Frank didn't respond, his gaze fixed on Leo, his finger tightening on the trigger. Drop the wood, Maxwell, now. The cold was a living thing, burrowing into his bones, stealing his strength. Leo clung to the splintered wood, his body numb, his muscles screaming in protest. The icy water was a relentless adversary, threatening to drag him under. Frank Buckley hadn't lowered his weapon. His face was a mask of cold calculation. Don't move, Leo, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Just stay where you are. You're letting him get away, Frank. Leo gasped, gesturing towards Blackwood, who was struggling to stay afloat a few feet away. He is the killer. Frank's gaze flickered towards Blackwood, then back to Leo. You don't understand, Leo. Some things are better left buried. The words echoed the anonymous phone call, the chilling warning that had haunted him for days. He finally understood. Frank wasn't investigating the truth. He was protecting it. You were involved, weren't you? Leo asked, his voice raspy with cold and disbelief. In Ethan's death, you covered it up. Frank remained silent for a long moment, his jaw clenched. Then he slowly lowered his weapon, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "The Bellwether family, they were donors to the academy," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "Major donors, their son, Ethan, was a rising star. But he was also difficult. He was questioning things, the training methods, the academic standards. The influence Pedigree Investments held over the academy. Pedigree Investments, the investment firm founded by Richard Thornton, a powerful local businessman and a key figure behind the Blackwood Academy, a man with deep pockets and even deeper connections. Thornton wanted Ethan silenced." Frank continued, his voice heavy with guilt. "He approached me, said Ethan was a liability, that his questions could jeopardize the academy's future." Leo stared at him, sickened. "You helped him, you helped him, you helped cover up a murder." "I didn't order it," Frank protested weakly. I turned a blind eye. I made sure the investigation went in the right direction. I convinced the medical examiner it was an accident. I protected the Bellwethers. I protected Thornton. I protected the town. "At the cost of a young boy's life," Leo said, his voice filled with contempt. Frank flinched, his face contorted with remorse. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, and I've been living with it ever since." "And Penhaligon?" Leo asked. "What did he have to do with it?" "Penhaligon was digging," Frank said, his voice regaining a trace of its usual authority. "He'd started asking questions about the academy, about Thornton, about the circumstances surrounding Ethan's death. He was getting too close to the truth. Thornton ordered him stopped, so Blackwood carried it out. He was Thornton's man." Frank confirmed, loyal, ruthless, and willing to do whatever it took to protect his employer. "And you tried to frame me," Leo said, his voice trembling with anger. "You let me take the fall." "You were the easy target," Frank said, avoiding Leo's gaze, an outsider. "With a troubled past, everyone already suspected you of something. It was convenient." A wave of icy water crashed over Leo's head, jolting him back to reality. Blackwood was almost gone, his struggles weakening. He had to do something. "Help me get Blackwood," Leo said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Then we can sort things out." Frank hesitated, then nodded. He secured a rope and cautiously approached Blackwood, hauling him towards the shore. The rescue was slow and arduous, the icy water numbing their hands and feet. Once Blackwood was safely on land, shivering and incoherent, Frank turned his attention back to Leo. He extended a hand, helping him out of the water. "I should arrest you," Frank said, his voice laced with regret. "Arrest me for surviving," Leo retorted, his teeth chattering. "Arrest me for uncovering the truth. I need a statement," Frank said, ignoring Leo's sarcasm. "From Blackwood, from you." They brought Blackwood to the sheriff's office, where, after hours of relentless questioning, he finally cracked. He confessed to the murder of Arthur Penhaligon, detailing Thornton's orders. He confirmed Frank's account of the cover-up surrounding Ethan Bellwether's death. The truth spilled out like a torrent, revealing a decades-long conspiracy built on greed, power, and deception. Richard Thornton, the respected pillar of the community, was at the center of it all. Leo sat in the interrogation room, exhausted and numb, listening to Blackwood's confession. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a play unfold. Then the door burst open, and Richard Thornton strode in, flanked by 2 bodyguards. He didn't bother to protest his arrest. He simply looked at Frank, his eyes filled with cold fury. "You betrayed me, Frank," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "After everything I've done for you." "You crossed a line, Richard," Frank replied, his voice steely. "You took a life, twice." As Thornton was led away, Frank turned to Leo. "I'm sorry, Leo, for everything." "It is not enough," Leo said, his voice hollow. "It will never be enough." He looked out the window, watching the snow continue to fall. The ice on Lake Minnetonka had begun to thaw, revealing the dark, murky waters beneath. The truth had emerged, fractured and painful. But beneath the surface, he knew, the scars of the past would remain. Suddenly, a commotion erupted outside. A siren wailed, followed by the screech of tires. Frank swore under his breath. "What is happening?" Leo asked. "Thornton's people," Frank said grimly. "They're trying to make a run for it." Frank raced outside, gun drawn. Leo followed, his instincts kicking in. He saw a sleek black SUV speeding away from the sheriff's office, Frank in hot pursuit. The SUV careened onto the icy road, heading towards the lake. Frank pursued relentlessly, his cruiser struggling to maintain traction. The SUV swerved, lost control, and smashed into a snowbank near the water's edge. Thornton and his bodyguards scrambled out. Attempting to escape on foot, Frank cornered them near the access point to the lake, a tense standoff unfolding in the blinding snow. "Stand down, Thornton," Frank shouted, his voice echoing across the frozen landscape. "You're surrounded." Thornton ignored him. Drawing a weapon before Frank could react, Thornton fired. The bullet whizzed past Frank's ear, embedding itself in the hood of his cruiser. Frank returned fire, striking Thornton in the shoulder. Thornton stumbled, dropping his weapon. His bodyguards, realizing the situation was hopeless, surrendered. But as Frank approached Thornton, a figure emerged from the shadows, a glint of metal in their hand. It was Julian Blackwood, who had somehow managed to escape custody. Blackwood lunged at Frank, aiming a blade at his chest. Frank sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the attack. They grappled, falling onto the unstable ice. The ice cracked and groaned under their combined weight. Blackwood, desperate and enraged, pushed Frank towards the open water. Frank lost his footing, teetering on the edge of the icy abyss. Leo didn't hesitate. He ran towards them. Ignoring the danger, he tackled Blackwood, sending them both crashing to the ground. But the ice couldn't hold them. It gave way with a sickening crack, plunging them into the frigid water. The icy water was a shock, stealing the air from his lungs. He kicked towards the surface, blindly grasping for anything solid. Frank Buckley was close, struggling alongside him, his face a mask of pain and exhaustion. Julian Blackwood was nowhere to be seen. Leo broke the surface, gasping for air, the frigid water burning his throat. He spotted Frank, a few feet away, clinging to a piece of broken ice. He pulled himself towards him, extending a hand. "Grab on," he yelled, his voice barely audible above the howling wind. Frank grasped his hand, his grip weak and trembling. Together, they managed to pull themselves onto a larger piece of ice, shivering uncontrollably. The rescue team arrived minutes later, hauling them both out of the water. Blackwood's body was recovered hours later. He hadn't resurfaced. The lake had claimed another victim. The fallout was swift and brutal. Richard Thornton and his bodyguards were arrested, facing a litany of charges. Frank Buckley, stripped of his badge and his reputation, was led away in handcuffs, the weight of his betrayal etched on his face. The community of Excelsior was reeling, grappling with the revelation of its dark secrets. The truth had shattered the facade of idyllic small-town life, exposing a network of corruption and deceit that reached the highest echelons of power. The Bellwether family, devastated by the renewed investigation into their son's death, quietly withdrew from public life. Pedigree Investments collapsed, its assets frozen amidst a wave of lawsuits. Leo was exonerated, his name cleared. The evidence he'd uncovered, combined with Blackwood's confession, proved his innocence. He was no longer a suspect, but a reluctant hero. He received calls from former colleagues offering him coaching positions, urging him to return to the world he'd left behind. The university offered him his old job back, with a full apology and a substantial salary. But he declined. He'd spent too long chasing a dream, sacrificing his integrity in the process. He'd learned a valuable lesson. True fulfillment wasn't found in accolades or prestige, but in purpose and connection. He found that purpose in the rink, surrounded by the awkward enthusiasm of the Falcons. He doubled down on coaching the youth team, instilling in them not just the skills of the game, but the values of teamwork, resilience, and integrity. He rebuilt his life, one practice at a time. He volunteered at the local food bank, spent time with Martha Olson at the library, and quietly assisted the new sheriff, a young idealistic woman named Sarah Jenkins, in navigating the complexities of small-town law enforcement. The winter eventually gave way to spring, the snow melting. The ice thawing, Lake Minnetonka slowly came back to life, shimmering under the warm sunlight. The resort project was abandoned, the land reverting to its natural state. A sense of cautious optimism began to permeate the community. He attended an AA meeting on a Tuesday night, drawn by a need to share his story, to connect with others who understood the struggle. He sat in a circle of strangers, each battling their own demons. He spoke about his past, the pressure, The ambition, the fall from grace. He spoke about the pain, the guilt, the temptation. He spoke about the healing power of honesty and the importance of accepting responsibility. I used to think that my worth was defined by my accomplishments, he said, his voice steady and clear by my success. But I was wrong. My worth comes from who I am, not what I do, from my ability to learn, to grow, to connect with others. He paused, looking around at the faces in the circle. I'm still a work in progress, he admitted, but I'm finally on the right path, and I'm grateful for that. As he walked out of the meeting, the air was crisp and clean, the scent of blooming flowers filling his lungs. He looked out at the lake, the water sparkling under the clear sky. Excelsior was healing, but he knew deep down that beneath the surface, secrets lingered. The ice had melted, exposing the truth. But who knew what lay hidden in the murky depths, waiting to be discovered?